think one of the most amazing things that homeschool gives you is time. So much more time with your children, and just so much time to just see them grow, and just so much time to just disciple them, and time to teach them, and teach them hospitality, teach them character development. They're with us so much more, so they can see our lives as models.
What we gradually allow to influence our children is what shapes them over the long run. It's not just the one thing here or the one thing there. It's the gradual daily thing where they're daily being pointed away from God, or maybe not even away from God, but they're daily being explained to that God doesn't have to be there for math, like I talked about in the last episode. There doesn't need to be a God for these things. And every day they're going to be taught that. And it's not the one time that they start to believe that. It's the Chinese water torture, the drips over time, where it's just one drip every second, and eventually it erodes away.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever planted trees, but you can't just plant like little baby trees and not give them any support. Yeah, you tether them to a pole so that way they're protected from the wind, the rain, the snow, hail, sleet. They're protected, and our job as parents are to protect our children. And as the tree grows, it can grow straight in the weather.
Rather live in a small home, cramped up with my kids, and know that they're firm and strong in their faith, and know Jesus, and have a great education, than to live in a big mansion and my kids be completely away from the Lord because they were brainwashed in. And had a wrong education. I think that's just I don't care what sacrifices I have to make. Welcome back to Homefront Faith. I'm Matt.
April.
Chase.
And I'm Erin.
Woohoo! We are coming back with episode 3. Which I'm very excited about. So if you are new to this podcast, we are just couples who have children who are just talking about life as Christians, raising our children. We run a home church, so we talked about that in the first episode. So if you haven't seen our episodes, I highly encourage you go back and check it out. And we are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over the place. You can find us on Homefront Faith. So I'm excited to jump into today's topic. We're gonna in our last episode we talked about our views of public school and kind of our thoughts on schooling children in general. Today we're going to take that a little bit more personal with homeschooling our children, our thoughts on homeschooling, and we're going to talk about kind of our philosophy on raising children as far as shielding them from culture versus preparing them for culture and that kind of thing. So we'll get into that. So if you're ready, let's just jump right in. So first of all, we've talked about in the last episode thoughts on public school. Now that we want to talk about, okay, we've talked about private school was a good option, but we have chosen to homeschool. And I think right now you guys are planning on homeschooling. And so or at least looking into that, what I really want to understand, want everybody to kind of give their thoughts on is, why do you think homeschool is such a good option? What makes homeschool optimal for children? So I'll let anybody start.
Okay, I'll go first.
Sure.
First off, I want to say I'm not a stickler for homeschool or private school. I'm good with either one.
Yeah, God may change our path. Yeah. I mean, our son is only 7 months old right now, and we're open to whatever God has for our family. I think I'm just kind of leaning more towards homeschooling right now.
Yeah, well, especially when they're young. And one of the big reasons we would pick homeschool is because of the, I guess, modularity is a good word, the flexibility of, maybe we need to do something one day and we need to switch some stuff around, or maybe we need to change the speed we're going at. Maybe our son's just a genius like his dad and he can go at a super speed.
Or he might learn a little slower, and that's totally fine. He's joking.
Yeah. No, but one of the reasons that I support homeschooling or private school, really, I like homeschooling right now, and it's this list of people I got here. Listen to this: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Da Vinci, Edison, Dickens, George Patton, C.S. Lewis. All of these people were either partially or fully homeschooled. And nearly all of them were classically educated, which is one of my favorite ways. One of the things that I'm really interested in studying more in the future, classical education.
Yeah, I was recently reading a book by Sally Clarkson, if you know who that is. But I really look up to her, and I have learned a ton from her. But I was reading her book called Mission of Motherhood, and she made a really good point. I feel like she put my thoughts into words. She was talking a lot about how when our children are very young, they're our responsibility. We can send them to children's church, we can send them to school, we can send them to a nanny, but ultimately, God gave us that responsibility to look after our children. And I take that responsibility very seriously, and it's our job to monitor what influences their lives. And what better way to do that than to have them at home. She was talking in her book about planting young trees like saplings. And I don't know if you've ever planted trees, but you can't just plant like little baby trees and not give them any support. They have to be tied and secured to a pole. What's the pole called? Does it have a name?
I don't know.
I don't
That's a
know.
good
I'm
question.
sure.
But you tie them. Yeah, you tether them to a pole so that way they're protected from the wind, the rain, the snow, hail, sleet. They're protected. And our job as parents are to protect our children. And as the tree grows, it can grow straight in the weather. We have trees in our yard. You can tell that they weren't secured to a pole and they're almost laying over and they don't produce much fruit. They're
Yeah.
kind of crooked.
We would say that in the South. They're little cattywampus.
Yeah. But the point is, it's our job to be that security while they're little and that support so they can grow straight and they can grow in the way that they should go. And that's my main reason that I would want to homeschool them.
Jumping off that and kind of recapping what we said in the last episode, you can't just send your kids anywhere. You got to be careful who you send them. And if you're homeschooling, you're sending them to yourself. And you're in charge. You're not letting an atheistic or secular government educate your kids.
April, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I had this quote by this woman whose name is Nikki Truesdell, and I really like her. I follow her on social media, and she wrote a book called Anyone Can Homeschool, and it's a really good book. But she had this quote, and it says, "Public schools have a worldview and includes Marxism, socialism, humanism, and naturalism. The only religion it does not teach is Christianity. There is no neutral education." So I want to give my children a Christ-centered education. I want every subject we do is a Christ-centered education. I know before in a recent episode, even Chase talked about math, even that being Christ-centered, everything being Christ-centered. And so if I have the opportunity as their parents to train them up in the way they should go, as the Bible says, I want to be able to train them up in the way they should go throughout their education.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, and Christ-centeredness is the key to everything. Like that is what makes me like a big push towards homeschool. But I think another thing that really drove me to looking at the optimal reality of homeschool for kids is that they removes this. Well, before I say that, it's one of those things where I feel like children, you can take your time. You don't want them to be behind. Homeschool kids generally aren't anyways. They're generally ahead. But you can take more time to get one-on-one with that child and make sure that they understand and are actually mastering the material rather than because you've got a class of a bunch of people, you got to push the class ahead. Whereas maybe there'll be things in the future that you grasp a little quicker than this topic. So let's slow down on this topic and then move faster through other topics because every child's different. So every child's going to learn different. Every child's going to have different pace. And so because of that, like y'all said, if they're like Chase, extremely intelligent or, but moving.
Glad you agree.
Don't let it go to your head. But like doing what, like that path, that taking my time and making sure you master the concept before we move on. But I also think there's a reality that's really important for kids. It removes comparison. They're not in a class saying, "Oh, I feel dumb because I'm not getting this as quick as Sally over in 2 seats over." And there's this you're not. I feel like sometimes if kids are in a class, they're constantly being taught to compare themselves to everyone else and not realizing, hey, you mastered something today that you struggled with yesterday, and that's a personal success. So you can remove that concept of comparison. Not that competition's not good, like you can create that type of things, but the biggest thing you should have competition with is yourself. And if you can overcome what you were struggling with yesterday, that's a greater sense of achievement than, hey, I'm not doing as good as this person, and I'm trying so hard to catch up to this person, and then once you achieve that, they're already further ahead, so you feel like you never achieve anything, whereas you really are. Yeah. I think homeschool highlights that for the children, is that you're doing better than you were, which makes them feel more personal achievement, which I think is a good thing for homeschool.
Mm-hmm. So we would all agree that homeschooling is a great format for achieving the purpose of education, which is shaping a person.
Yeah.
I said in the last episode, a lot of people think education is something we have to do in order to make a living, but instead education is making us who we are. It is showing us how to live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, we want our kids, our goal, at least me and Matt's goal, is our kids to love learning, to be lifelong learners. We don't want them just to memorize facts. We don't want them just to, pass tests. It's not just, 9 to 12 or 9 to 1 is school time. We want them to always be learning, to love learning, and we want to fuel their interest. So if they're interested in something, okay, let's go find the books about it. Let's look at stuff up about it online. You can tailor make their education. So if, say a kid is really, really interested in dinosaurs, you could talk about dinosaurs for a couple weeks, not just one day. You could really dive into subjects, and then, in school, it might just be a day or a week. We have to move on to the next thing. But if your kid is really passionate about something or interested in something, you could study it for a month.
And that actually, I think, will foster in children. Of course, our son is in middle school age and our daughter's elementary. And I can, for some kids, especially in the high school ages and stuff, I think being able to tailor to what their interest is, or once they kind of have an idea of what they may want to do with their lives as they get a little bit older, you can divest or invest time into that they may not get in a larger classroom. So which makes homeschool optimal for, in my opinion, for education. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get that in, especially a private school, where you get that Christ-centeredness, which is the most important. In private schools, you can get a lot of times smaller classes, which gives a little bit more time to take it a little slower or faster if need be, whatever the situation is for the kids. So private school is not a bad option, but when you're with homeschool, you have that flexibility as the parent. You get to make those decisions for your child, which I feel like anytime the parent gets to make those decisions for their child, it's always going to be more optimal than someone else, because you know your child at a level.
And in our experience, this is our third year doing it. If something's not working, if we don't like a book, or if we realize something we're doing isn't working, we just toss it and do something else.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and you guys talking about that, it made me think about teaching my students in the public schools, and if these kids aren't reading by the time they're 5 and 6 years old, that's a huge problem. They're evaluated for special ed. They're put on lists to be watched. But if they're at home learning, and if you're homeschooling, well, some of your children, they might start reading at 4, and some might not start reading till they're 7. And, you get to make that decision, and there's no stress on the students at all. So that's what that made me think of too.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. So keeping in mind everything we just said about homeschool and about what we like about homeschool and why we think it's optimal as far as for a child's education, not that it's the only way or but it's a great way for educating. What in that case would a homeschool day look like? What would be your ideal homeschool day? And not just, so when we prepped this show and I gave this question, I specifically focused on an individual day, but if you have thoughts on a more general, not just one day, here's how one day would go, but generalized idea of what homeschool would look like. That's what we really want to talk about. So we're already homeschooling, so we can talk about what we, what things we currently do versus things we've changed versus things we want to do. But for you guys who haven't started homeschooling, you probably have ideas of what you want it to be when you do. So what's everybody's thoughts on what a homeschool day look like, or what do you want to see within homeschool?
That's right. Okay. Well, I'm a teacher, so I love this topic. I could talk about it all day. And I feel like when I think about homeschooling, I just have all these ideas. But since my son was born, I feel like my eyes have been open to how quickly they grow and how fast time goes. And I'm like, oh man, he's we're going to be starting before we know it. So I really dove in, trying to decide what type of homeschooling, we want to go with. Because if you've looked into it at all, there's tons of different, philosophies you could look at and study. But right now, Chase and I, we really like the classical education, and I really like Charlotte Mason. I know you've started looking into her a little bit more, but we're kind of wanting to combine those two. And what that would look like is, lots of literature instead of using a lot of textbooks, using real, she calls them living books. So a lot of good classical literature, lots of outside time, lots of nature study. We talked about that on the last podcast, getting lots of outside time. I want to focus on manners and hospitality because that is not something that's taught in the public school system. And really just, making people feel welcome in our home. And when we're not in our home, really respecting people. I would like lots of scheduled free time to explore interests, just like you guys were talking about. When they're little, I don't want to focus a lot on screens, but even as they grow, me and Chase have talked about this, if they are interested in like computer programming or something that has to do with technology, like I want them to have time to explore that.
Yeah, even because when I was a kid, we would always, me and my brother would tell our parents, I just want to play video games when I'm an adult. That's what I want to do for a living. And they laughed. But now there's people making tons of money doing that, streaming. It's like
Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the wrong thing in my life.
Thanks, Mom and Dad. But no, you can't tell your kids that's not a career path anymore. I mean, it might not be a career path that's good to pursue, but it is a career path nowadays.
Yeah. I just kind of want to give our children, I want them to be able to explore what's out there. And I feel like in homeschooling, they'll have time to do that. I want to teach them how to read music. I want, if they're interested in sports, I want them to have time to do sports. If they want to do jujitsu, I mean, I think you guys get where I'm going with this. I just, we have a farm. We have lots of farm animals, and we hopefully want to grow our farm. But, if our children want to show farm animals and 4-H, like, I want them to have all the opportunities so they can decide what they want to do when they're older.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think one of the most amazing things that homeschool gives you is time. So much more time with your children, and just so much time to just see them grow, and just so much time to just disciple them, and time to teach them, and teach them hospitality, teach them character development. They're with us so much more, so they can see our lives as models, and just gives us so much more time to just go outside, go to the park, go to the battlefield, and you don't have to feel rushed. I know a lot of people who are in public school or even private school, they get home with their kids and have dinner and do homework and baths. It's like their day is done. We have so much free time with our kids during the day. I have so much time. We can go walk in the battlefield. We can go play in a creek. I mean,
by the way, if you're listening to this, what she means by battlefield, we live close to a Civil War battlefield. Yeah, I think time is the biggest blessing. So for our homeschool day, we get up in the morning, and I'm going to give you a rigid, here's everything we do. But when we get up in the morning, we have time before we start any type of school stuff. We eat breakfast. The kids have chores they do, taking care of the pets, things like that. And then after that, everybody gets ready. And our goal, we actually have, for the academic portion of the day, we have a table we set up that's just specifically for homeschool. So we have separate from like the rooms or whatever. We have one table we set up in the living room, and we do homeschool there. And we start out every morning with the pledge, just like you would in real school, because I think instilling that patriotism into our children is very important. So we do that. We pray. We read the Bible. Our first subject, we sit down, we read the Bible. We have Bible time. We talk about theological concepts with our kids. After Bible, we actually just recently started this. We're going through with both of our kids, talking about logical fallacies and learning about how to actually make valid arguments and make sure your beliefs are valid and not fallacious. And so we're doing that with both our kids. And our daughter, she's in 3rd grade, and in 3rd grade, she's already learning the foundations of logic, which are so really cool for her. And then we split up, and one kid does they go to different grade level and they do basics like math and things like that, the basic arithmetic stuff. But usually you have that for just, for our third grader, she's doing like academic type learning with, books and learning and reading and doing the things for probably about an hour and a half. And then after that, her time's freed up to do other type of learning and other things beyond just to be outside, to go different things. We go to the library, do different things because it frees up. She's not just sitting in a classroom for 8 hours. She gets all of her academics in, and because it's focused to her, it's not like we're waiting on everybody else in the class. As soon as she's good, it's one-on-one. It's just easier. And then our son's doing the same thing. Him being in middle school has a little bit more academic, a little bit longer usually to get him because he's learning writing essays and doing things which take a little bit more time. But to get through the academic thing, and then you have the entire day when kids are still in public schools and still sitting. We have the entire day to do other activities, get outside, do other things. It's just that time, that freedom to be able to do that is amazing to me. And it makes you one day you say, okay, we got all this extra time. Let's go. What you would do is a field trip in school. Let's go to the zoo. Let's go learn about animals. We could just do that any day that we, just get out and about and go learn things outside of a classroom setting. I think that's an incredible tool for homeschool. It just gives you time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear anything after you said you forced your kids to say the pledge. What kind of person are you?
Well, they want to say it.
What are you, a patriot?
As a matter of fact,
this country?
Recently my kids have been standing up on their chairs with their hands over their heart saying it.
Chase is very sarcastic, by the way.
Yes, that was sarcasm. You did not get
you all have guessed by now.
But I did want to add, this reminded me of our conversation the other day. I think Chase was respectfully trying to make sure we were on the same page. When you talk about Charlotte Mason, if you don't know a lot about her, it might just sound like, we're just going on nature walks and drawing in our journals all day. But I do like a good curriculum. And if you know me, I like to stick to a schedule. And Charlotte Mason is all about instilling habits, like good habits in your day for your children. So I'm not opposed to a good curriculum, a good appropriate workbook if it's appropriate, for the child.
Something rigorous.
Now, yeah. I will add to this, and if you're thinking about homeschooling or if you've ever considered or just wanting to know, when we started homeschooling, we had a curriculum. We used Abeka, which is a really well-known Christian curriculum, and we did that for the whole first year. But as what we found is that it was too rigid and too much stuff that our kids weren't.
It'd be great for a Christian school.
It'd be great for a school setting. Yeah.
But it wasn't great for us.
It wasn't great in a home setting. And so there's parts of it that were good for home setting. We did Abeka the second year, parts of Abeka, and added some other things. My point in saying that is having a good curriculum is important, but the great thing about homeschool is it's flexible.
Yeah.
So you can have a curriculum and maybe you decide instead of doing this one curriculum the entire time, I'm going to pull in this workbook or this curriculum from this company, but I like this one over here. Don't feel, and this is some people when they homeschool, especially their first year, they're really nervous about doing it because you've never done anything like it before. You're nervous. So you feel stay rigid. The beauty of homeschool and what makes it so valuable for children is that it's not rigid, that you can have a schedule, have a curriculum, but be willing to move as your child, like flow with your child. They will learn and grow, and you can teach them incredible things, but don't get so bound up in the rigidness of I've got to do it. Our first year we were so nervous. Like I'm like, we're taking them out of school. What if I screw my kid up? That was my answer. So we were so rigid, and then we realized they learn so much more without that rigidity. I think that's a very important.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys were thinking too, like, okay, everybody's watching now. We made this huge step. If our kids can't read or do this math problem, they're going to be judging us. So I'm sure you had those thoughts.
But at least they're not going to have an atheistic secular foundation,
right?
Yes,
right.
I agree.
So yeah, be flexible.
Yeah, like this year we bought for Luke. He's our 13-year-old. We bought him the Abeka literature program. Well, he was done it by December. He was done the whole year's program. Wow. So I'm like, okay, now we just need to go get some books. So we just got like The Hiding Place. He read that, and then he just finished The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and now he's reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So if you buy a curriculum, you may end up like finishing it way before, but you can just go get other books from the library.
Get other books. Even with teaching Luke to write, we started with a program. It was a great program that helped build the foundations of writing. And then now that he's done that program, we're doing things like, okay, I'm giving him different types of ways to brainstorm. So here's a cause and effect chart. Here's different things. Brainstorm. And then he did like 8 different brainstorming activities. Now he's having to go back and write papers using his brainstorming techniques to everything he brainstormed on this paper. So, and that's just something I found a worksheet for brainstorming things online and just printed it out. And so you can mix and match, which makes it very good for homeschool. And then of course, like you said, the classical literature, just reading important things like the old classics just helps so much with vocabulary and other things.
I just had someone reach out to me. She used to be our neighbor, and she just reached out to me this week, and she's like, I want to homeschool, but she's like, it's so overwhelming. I look at the curriculum, it's expensive. There's so many options. And I was like, what you really need to do is just get a good math curriculum and get something good for like grammar and stuff like that. Like everything else you can probably get at the library. You can get literature at the library, you can get science books at the library, you can get history books at the library. I said, there's so much stuff online. You can get history online. Matt does science experiments online. I was like, you don't have to like go out and spend thousands of dollars on curriculum. Just get a really good math and like a really good grammar, writing, and probably everything else can be in the library.
It builds, like, the kids love it, and they learn so much more than you think they will. You think you may not be. For anyone who feels like I'm not qualified to teach, you are.
Yes.
You absolutely are. You can teach your children. Yeah, as long as you take it seriously and actually care about their education, care about them growing, you're far better.
Yeah. Well,
for your child than anybody else.
And you love your children more than any teacher ever will. Not that the teachers won't love them, but I did want to add to the resources. There's a website called Teachers Pay Teachers, and they have tons of free resources on there that you can just print out. So I did that a lot when I was a teacher.
I'll put that link down in the description.
And there's also hundreds of different co-ops for whatever kind of program you think. There's some for classical. I'm sure there's some for every kind of different rabbit hole you want to go down in the homeschool world. And a lot of them are local. They're full of local kids and local people. You probably all go to the same playgrounds and libraries anyway. Get together and help each other.
I would love to do like a once a week co-op, like classical conversations.
Yeah.
And I would love to like be a part of teaching and stuff.
And there's also like different things. So look into your options if you're interested in doing it, because there's co-ops where you actually go and learn and have classes with them. There's also homeschool groups that are for social reasons. Like they don't necessarily meet to do like
part of the homeschool association. So it's not like going and doing like classes and learning, but first they're there just for support. There's a lot of like veteran homeschool moms who've been doing it for like 15 years, and they have like adult kids that do it. And they have tons of like social stuff. They have nature walks, and they have Mom's Day Out, and they have geography fairs and science fairs, and they have all kinds of connections. Just like in our state, you have to do testing at the end of every, third year, 6th year, and you have to do testing. And so they actually have it all set up. Like it's Hope's year to test. She just goes to this church and they have it. They just pay like a fee, and they have like a proctor to do the testing. They order the test. They send the test out to be graded.
They handle it all, which is really nice. And then it does the social aspect of like they have get-togethers for the kids. One thing they did that I thought was really cool, they had what they called Socratic circles, where they have teenagers come in and they sit in a circle. You give them a topic, and then they debate the topic back and forth, and they learn to just interact with other people on controversial topics, and cool. It was just really cool. And it's just a way where it's not necessarily they're learning, but they're not necessarily sitting in a class being taught something. Those type of learnings, nature walks, things like that are so important and help teach kids.
Last year they did a field day. So a lot of times public schools will do a big field day at the end of the
last year.
Year. They did a field day for all of them. So it's not like we're just sitting in our house all day, like scary world.
Yes. Yeah. And well, speaking of that, let's talk about that, because that kind of leads into our next couple of questions, and then we'll wrap up after those. But I think sometimes people have, so there's two aspects that we need to talk about. I'm going to kind of combine these questions and we can kind of talk through both of them. one big important thing that you kind of heard us hint about multiple times is the culture that is taught in government schools and things isn't necessarily the culture we want our children to have or to grow up in. And so we want to shield our children from culture. So the first question is kind of what aspects of culture do you think are not healthy for kids that you can at home homeschooling them you can help guard against? And then the second question that's kind of a follow-up to that, how do we balance shielding our kids from culture as homeschoolers but also preparing them for culture when they haven't been in public school, they haven't seen some of the things that other kids? How do we balance preparing them for that culture and shielding them from that culture at the same time? So what aspects of culture are not good for them, and then how do we balance those two things?
I think when I thought about this question, I kind of went along the lines of like, what is our government society? What is our government? What do they want my son to become at the end of the 12 years that they have him? And they want him to be a dependent forever. They want him to be gullible. They want him to be a coward and weak, not stand up for truth, except for the things that they deem are admirable that he should stand up for. And those things are the opposite of what I would stand up for and what I would ask him to stand up for. Our society is just continually seeking to go against biblical principles. One of the biggest ones of that would be differences in genders. Like, what is a woman? What is a man? These are all questions that somebody would have laughed at you when I was in elementary school.
That should be a simple question.
Yeah, even in high school, we would have laughed if you would have said that. And now, like, we've got people testifying before Congress that can't answer that because they're not a biologist. This is silly, people. It's silly, but it's starting to become more and more reality. And I think a really fitting quote here is the C.S. Lewis quote: "We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful." So when you do all this to kids, to our future people, and then we wonder why society is falling apart, we wonder why divorce rates are higher than they ever have been, and fatherless homes are higher than then, crime, and all of these things. We're asking our children, our future citizens, to be moral after we've already told them there is no morality by raising them in this secular environment.
Yeah, Erin.
Good. When I was thinking about this, which I feel like there's lots of answers that we could give, but one of the things that really stood out in my mind is that, especially young children, and I'm going to try to articulate this to sound the right way, y'all can help me, but that, like I almost said students, that our children need the independence and they need the space to find who they are and to find, their truth. We hear that a lot. But really, kids, especially small children, they don't need space. They need loving parents and they need that relationship. And they need us to pour love into them, to show them Jesus and to foster that relationship with Jesus. And they need to be explicitly taught who they are and who Christ is. They don't need just space to figure it out on their own. So,
yeah, or your kid will think they're a dinosaur. And are you going to encourage them? But you're a T-Rex this week. Let's go get you a surgery and turn you into a T-Rex. It's just silly.
Yeah,
we need to stop living in other realities.
Yeah, I think too, like, people have this idea, like homeschoolers or Christians, like we bury our head in the sand and we have no idea what's going on in the world. But it's not that. It's that we teach our children what's going on in the world, but we're teaching them that, from our place of authority. We don't send them out and someone else is the authority figure and they're teaching them that from a place of authority. Like, I think it was this past year, there was a local public school and there was a second grade substitute teacher and he was a man, fully dressed. He was fully a man and he came in dressed as a woman and wanted the second graders to call him ma'am. Well, we talked to our kids about that and we told them that story and we were telling them why we don't believe in this and we told them our values and our beliefs. So we don't just not tell our kids what's going out in the world. We talk to our kids about alternative lifestyles but we tell them from a place of our authority and place from our beliefs and they're hearing it from us. They're not going out into the world and hearing it from somewhere else. So I think it's not like you're shielding. our kids don't know anything and they're just ignorant and they go out and they turn 18. They're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But it's from our place of authority and it's from our worldview and viewpoint. But we don't shield them so much that like they don't know anything that's going on in the world. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah. I think the concept of protecting them from culture isn't protecting them from knowing what's out there. It's protecting them from being indoctrinated that what's out there is all okay and good. Right. And I think that's what I want to shield my children from. It's not, we've talked about things like abortion. We've talked about things that are things that we would find morally, wrong, and that we know that God doesn't support. We went through these things with our children. We have conversations with our children related to this stuff, and I don't want to shield them. I want to shield them from people telling them that those things are good or okay. Not that I want to shield them from knowing about it. And I think the way we protect and combat or prepare them for society is by not just telling them, here's what the situations are, but giving them valid, good, logical, rational reasons for why we believe what we believe. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I think a lot of people fail sometimes with children, is that they don't, you tell them what to believe, you tell them what this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing, you teach them right from wrong. But sometimes we forget to give them the reasons things are wrong, the whys, the background information. Kids can. One thing I've learned with homeschooling, kids are much more able to soak up things than we give them credit for. Sometimes and I think because government schools dumb down children and dumb down curriculum a lot.
In some ways, but not with they'll know a lot of things that they shouldn't know.
Yeah. I'm talking about that comes from other kids and other things. But I'm talking, and I guess sometimes from the school. But I'm talking about they can absorb, they can understand the why behind the what. So when I tell my child, why we don't support, transgenderism, or we think that's wrong, or why we think, homosexuality is wrong, or why we think, different policies are there in the government, abortion, whatever. When we tell them that, we don't just tell them it's wrong. We tell them why. We give them the reasoning behind it. And I think if you can arm them with reasoning and arm them with logic and arm them with understanding, then when they go out into society and they see these things, or even if come across other things, they have learned how to think. They've learned how to be rational, and they've learned how to think through it. So now they're not just going to believe whatever everybody tells them in culture. And I think that's how we protect them and prepare them for culture outside of our homes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. No, we're commanded to be aware of the tactics of the enemy. It's not something that should catch us off guard. We should know. So no, you shouldn't bury your kid's head in the sand. That happens a lot in homeschool circles.
It does.
Where we just want to cover them up. But really, instead of just sending them off into the darkness by themselves, you're going with them with a flashlight, telling them what these things are. Yep. That's kind of the way I think about it, is they're not just hiding forever and they're going to have no concept of reality. It's no, you're using the Bible to frame their reality based off what God has told us that reality is. And it's important.
Yeah.
I think there's a big misconception with, I heard it a lot growing up anyway, was thinking of our kids as missionaries. Like we send our kids to the public schools to be missionaries to these kids. That's not what they are. Your kids are not missionaries. They're still being forged and shaped into who they are as Christians themselves. I know if I'm still being shaped. My son definitely still needs to be shaped as a 7-month-old. So I'm not going to send him to another country and ask him to win that country for the Lord. Right. So why would I do that? The same thing with public school. My son's not a missionary. He can be used by God, definitely. And I expect that he will be. But I'm commanded to bring him up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And that's not, I don't think I can do that to the best of my ability, sending him as a missionary before he's ready to be a missionary.
What's sad is I've heard that growing up too, or I heard it from different people, different places. What's sad is a lot of people who will say that, you wouldn't, as a parent, you're not even on your job, and you're scared to speak up, and you expect your kid who has an authority figure in the classroom who's telling them all these things to be able to speak up against it. No, it is our job to protect our children, to raise them up correctly. So when they are of age and able to move out and go onto their own and step out into the mission field, they're prepared because they were trained by us. And I think, sending them in with it's like someone joining the military, skipping boot camp and just going right into war day one. Like, yeah, you don't do that. And so, yeah, I agree completely. I think that's a big misconception.
Yeah. In one of the books that I was reading, it made the point that, a lot of people, when children are disobeying, they say, oh, it's because they have a really strong will. But the book I was reading said they're disobeying and they're doing these things because they don't have a strong will. And we have to teach them to have a strong will, to have that self-control that the Bible or that the Holy Spirit gives us. The Bible says the Holy Spirit gives us. So that's what that made me think of.
I agree. Any closing thoughts?
I guess just kind of jumping off of this is it's what we gradually allow to influence our children is what shapes them over the long run. It's not just the one thing here or the one thing there. It's the gradual daily thing where they're daily being pointed away from God, or maybe not even away from God, but they're daily being explained to that God doesn't have to be there for math. Like I talked about in the last episode, there doesn't need to be a God for these things. And every day they're going to be taught that. And it's not the one time that they start to believe that. It's the Chinese water torture, the drips over time, where it's just one drip every second, and eventually it erodes away. I mean, that's what water does. Water does that to rock. Eventually, it's going to erode away.
Yeah, and you may not think, well, in my school they're not saying that, but it's the absence of what's being said. If they learn all these foundational things of life without God being brought into it, then what they're learning, whether it's intentionally said or not, is that all these things are sustainable apart from God. So when they get to older, they're to that point of, well, God wasn't involved in any of that, so why do I need God going forward? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if you can have an education at home where everything's God-centered, then at that point, they know everything I've learned has been centered around God, so God is necessary for life.
Yeah, it's back to that quote that I had said earlier. There is no neutral worldview. There is no neutral education. So we have the ability to give a Christ-centered education and a worldview. That's what I want to do. A lot of people think, oh, at public school, they're just learning, math and history and science. They're not learning a worldview. Yes, they are.
They are.
Definitely.
Your children's foundation is being shaped. Who's it being shaped by? That's the question. A good example, practically this is if Matt's kids were watching Netflix and they saw two dudes making out, that they would feel in themselves that that's wrong. If my son was 2 years old and saw that on TV, he wouldn't understand that that's necessarily wrong. And if he saw that every day on TV, he would begin to think that's normal. So there's like a difference there. If Matt's kids has a foundation, my son doesn't have a foundation yet. So who's going to shape that? Me or somebody that doesn't believe God's necessary? And I'm going to say me and my wife.
Yeah, I did want to add some thoughts about, how to practically shield our children, because we've never done this before. We're new to this. So, I talk all the time about the books that I'm reading, but I want to learn from people that have done this before, not just, take somebody's word for it. And you can ask Chase. I was searching all over the house because I could not remember which book I read this in. But I know for sure I've heard all kinds of different people talk about this. The Mama Bear Apologetics ladies talk about this. Doug Wilson, I know, is where I read it. All kinds of different people. But they say practically while the children are young, that's when you're going to shield them the most. You decide what they're watching. You decide what websites they're allowed on, what games they can play, who they're talking to. So when they're really little, you are in charge, you decide. And then while they start to grow and mature, you kind of decide, is when your child is mature enough, so maybe in middle school, you can start showing them some different types of media, maybe a song you can listen to and read the lyrics. And then you can start asking them questions about the morals in this song or about the main character in this movie. You can start to question these things and, talk through the things with them and see what kind of answers they're giving you. And then you can kind of tell them, what the right answers are. And then hopefully by the time they're older teenagers, you're more hands off and you've put in the hard work with your children and you don't have to necessarily tell them what they're allowed to listen to or what they're allowed to watch. So I think that's what I would like to do with our children.
Yeah, we can all pause our TVs now. There's no excuse to just like ignore something on the TV. Pause it and use it as a teaching tool for your kids. Explain your worldview, what's right and wrong. Explain the worldview of the people on the TV. Just use it as a teaching tool. Don't let it influence them. Point out to them why it's wrong.
Yeah, don't just like hurry and turn it off and say, oh, don't look at that, because then that's going to be, more enticing.
Right.
Yeah, it creates curiosity.
Yeah, and I'll try to find the book that I'm thinking of, but like it even had a list of questions that you can ask your kids. I think it was a Doug Wilson book. I can't remember. I'll look for it. But I know like Sally Clarkson's talked about that, Abby from M is for Mama, like all these different people. So I know it's like something that I can trust to do with my children. So that's what I would like to do.
Yeah. And we've done that many times. Like even now, you can't even watch like Survivor without talking about a gay person. So it's like we have to stop. Okay, this is what a gay person is. This is what they believe. This is what we believe. We don't just say, oh, okay, go turn it off. Huh?
And couching that in the concept of why it's what we believe and why it's wrong. There's a lot of people who will see that. Okay, kids are watching. Okay, we'll pause it. Just let you know we don't agree with it, and then move on. No, don't just say this is why we this is what we disagree with. Explain why. Give them a foundation for processing why. Because once they get out in the world, it's going to be they're going to be asked why. Why are you against this? Or don't you care about people? Don't you this, that, and the other? Well, they need to be armed with an understanding of why. And so I think that's the key. And so I think to wrap this up, to shield our children, we shield them initially more strenuously than as they get older. And then as they get older, we kind of loosen those reins a little bit, but always looking for a foundation of understanding what they're seeing. I like Chase's analogy, what he just said a moment ago. We walk through the darkness with them, but we carry the flashlight and expose and show what it is and explain. And I think that's a very important key for our children. And homeschool gives you the ability to do that without somebody else coming in and trying to go against you or oppose what you're teaching. And so I think homeschool is such an important thing. If you can do it, I highly recommend it for everybody. And if the only thing stopping you from doing it is you think you aren't qualified or you don't think you can do good, don't let that stop you. Step out and try. God gives grace for it. He trusted you with your children, then he trusts you with their education.
And if you have to make financial sacrifices, you should do it. You are responsible for your kids' education and the foundation that they're being brought up in. Is your boat or your second car more important than that? It's the kind of questions you have to ask.
I would sell everything.
I would. I'd rather live in a small home, cramped up with my kids, and know that they're firm and strong in their faith, and know Jesus, and have a great education, than to live in a big mansion and my kids be completely away from the Lord because they were brainwashed and had a wrong education. I think that's just I don't care what sacrifices I have to make. It's just important. And so I challenge you. We'll leave you with that. If you have any questions about homeschool, feel free to comment below. We'll answer any questions we can think of. I say comment below. If you're listening to this on YouTube, that's where you can comment down below. And we will see you guys